All right, let me show you something here. Now, when Lennox Lewis lost to Oliver McCall, that was the first loss of his career. He was 30 years of age. He got knocked out in 2 rounds. Now, he did not have an immediate rematch clause in the contract for the Oliver McCall fight. So even though him and his manager, Frank Maloney, fought for that immediate rematch, they were unable to secure it. Oliver McCall went off and fought, who was it, Larry Holmes? Then he fought Frank Bruno, lost to Bruno. So Lewis had to change trainers. He did the right thing. He was with Pepe Correa prior, and prior to Pepe Correa, he was with John Davenport. But he sacked Pepe Correa. He hired Manny Stewart, who ironically trained McCall for that Lewis fight, because Lewis figured, who better to train me and fix all my mistakes and all my problems than the guy who trained McCall to beat me? Very smart move. So he hired Manny Stewart. Manny Stewart had been a admirer of Lennox Lewis for a long time, and Manny Stewart talked about that. If any of you haven't seen my series on Manny Stewart and Lennox Lewis, then check it out on my channel. So that was in 1994. Lewis came back in 1995, fought Lionel Butler, and you could clearly see that Lewis was gun shy. You could clearly see that he had mental scars. He had demons in his mind from the Oliver McCall defeat. And so it took a while for Lewis to get his confidence back. I want to say it took several fights. He was very gun shy and just shaky against Butler, but he did get the win. And Butler didn't come in shape. Butler, he had some power there. He was a fringe contender, but nothing special. He was somebody who Lewis really should have been handling a lot better than he did. But again, this is because of the residual psychological scars from the Oliver McCall defeat the previous year. Fought Justin Fortune, won that fight easily. Fought Tommy Morrison. And again, Lewis was very cautious against Morrison. Earlier on in his career, Lewis was more aggressive than what we saw him against Morrison. Very cautious, didn't want to get clipped, but still did get the win. Then he fought Ray Mercer, and it was a very tough fight. I think that because he took so many punches against Mercer, it actually restored some of his confidence in his own chin, because he took the shots well, and it was a real barn burner of a fight. If you've never seen Lennox Lewis versus Ray Mercer, you can watch it on YouTube. Highly recommended. Real good fight. And Lewis showed tremendous inside fighting ability in that fight. Not only the ability to box at long range, as we all know he can do, but the inside fighting ability was really impressive there. Then he finally had the McCall rematch 3 years after the first fight. So it took 3 years before he managed to get McCall back in the ring. By this time, McCall had lost to Frank Bruno. Bruno had lost to Tyson. There was, Tyson Holyfield. And in the midst of it all, the WBC belt became vacant again. Lewis fought McCall in a rematch for the vacant WBC belt. And even in this fight, Lewis's confidence was still not what it used to be. Lewis's confidence here against McCall in the rematch in 97 wasn't the same as Lewis's confidence going into the first fight against McCall or Jackson or Bruno or Tucker or Ruddock. Back here in 92, 93, his confidence was a lot higher than it was for the McCall rematch, where he was still dealing with those demons from that loss. So think about it. This is one of the greatest heavyweights of all time. This is an Olympic gold medalist, not a guy who had some questionable decisions go his way in the Olympics. No, this guy won the Olympics by stopping Riddick Bowe in the final and beating everybody else out of sight that he faced. So he won a legit gold medal, stopped Bowe in the final, and had loads of amateur fights. He'd been a world champion, fought people like Razor Ruddock and blasted him out in 2. And yet he was still dealing with demons from a knockout defeat in 97, and the knockout defeat happened in 94. So for years, he was still battling with questions in his own mind about his punch resistance. Then he fought Akin one day, after the McCall fight, the rematch. I think that helped because he didn't get hurt in the rematch. McCall had a mental breakdown because McCall always had substance abuse problems, and he essentially just stopped fighting and started crying in the middle of the ring. It was the strangest thing. He went on to fight Henry Akin one day, Andrew Golota, and this is where Lewis finally started hitting his stride again in terms of confidence. He always had the ability. Manny Stewart tweaked his style, tweaked his technique, got him to stop throwing the right hand in a looping fashion so that people could anticipate it and read it and therefore counter him the way that McCall did. McCall beat him to the punch. Lewis was throwing a looping right hand, McCall threw a straight right hand, and, you know, McCall's shot got there first and knocked Lewis out. So Manny Stewart got Lewis firing more straight right hands, and he also just got him back to basics and sorted out his technique. You know, he smoothed over the rough edges, etc. Just got him to be a bit more polished and precise. Now, if you look at Anthony Joshua, he is nowhere near as polished as Lennox Lewis was. Never mind as polished as Lewis was once he got in his stride with Manny Stewart. AJ is not even as polished as Lewis was before Lewis was with Manny Stewart. This is why I keep saying that AJ needs to change trainers, because I'm not saying he's going to be exactly like Lennox Lewis, but there's still something amateurish about his technique. There's still something raw there. As far as AJ has got on the talent that he has, his technique doesn't do his physical ability justice. Yeah? He's still boxing in a kind of a Robert McCracken, British 1980s boxing style. And that is so outdated and so ineffective, and it's not going to take him as high as he needs to go, or as high as he potentially could go. Yeah. And again, if you look at guys like Usyk's style is way more polished than AJ's style. You know, AJ throws crisper power shots than Tyson Fury, but defensively, Tyson Fury is much more polished. He's much more assured. He's got much more veteran moves and old man moves. AJ doesn't have all that. He's still training with amateurs at Team GB. You know, and the amateur ethos of boxing is very different to the professional ethos. I think he needs to get out of there. You know, being around all those amateurs, end up fighting like an amateur. And look, a lot of amateurs are very good, but amateur boxing and professional boxing are different. And it's the difference that AJ needs to learn. You know, and he knows a lot about professional boxing. Don't get it twisted. He knows a lot, but at the elite level, there's so much more he could know. There's so much more he could learn, and there's so much more he could do by way of technique. So anyway, getting back to Lennox Lewis. Lewis, in the years following his defeat to McCall, took a while to regain his confidence. He really started hitting his stride around Henry Akinwande Golota, who he knocked out in one round. Shannon Briggs, that was a tough fight for him, but he came through and stopped Briggs. Hit a bit of a blip with Željko Mavrovic, who, by the way, bizarrely fought recently. Hit a bit of a blip there. That was a tough fight against Željko Mavrovic. Very, very tough Croatian fighter. Very underrated. Had a tough fight there, but did win. Then there were the fights against Holyfield. Now, even against Holyfield in the first fight, Holyfield was talking about knocking Lewis out in 3 rounds like McCall knocked him out in 2. He was talking about, you know, hitting Lewis on that glass jaw. You know, there was always this narrative in the press that Lewis was chinny. I mean, even now, people still say it. And back then, Lewis's opponents would play on it. They'd say, I'm going to hit you on your glass jaw. I'm going to knock you out, just like McCall did. They would try and get in his head. And they did it quite successfully, actually, because Lewis was very cautious in the first Holyfield fight. Even though most people believe he won the fight, it got declared a draw and it was very controversial. Most people feel like he was hard done by, but he was very, very cautious. In the second fight, Lewis was a lot more assertive against Holyfield, and it actually turned out to be closer, you know, despite the fact Lewis was more assertive. I guess that kind of played into Holyfield's hands a little bit, and Holyfield was better second time around. But Lewis's confidence was probably an all-time high by the time he got to the Holyfield rematch. And when I say all-time high, I would say since the McCall defeat. Yeah, he may have been more confident than this at certain points prior to the McCall defeat, but certainly post McCall 1, this, I would say, was an all-time high in confidence for Lewis, was the Holyfield rematch. Then, of course, he went in against Michael Grant, demolished him, demolished Francois Botha, easily outboxed David Tua, fought Hasim Ratman. Now, this is really the perfect example of how Lewis's rehabilitation, mental rehabilitation from the Oliver McCall defeat helped him to become stronger and helped him to become a better fighter. It's not just the defeat itself, it's the rehabilitation afterwards. Against Hasim Ratman, he gets knocked out. He goes straight back in against Ratman, and he's not gun shy. He's not tentative like he was against Lionel Butler or in the McCall rematch. No, he's full of confidence. He's pumping his jab out, and he absolutely destroys Hasim Ratman, knocks him out in 4 rounds with one punch, one of the best punches Lewis landed in his whole career. But it took years for Lewis to regain the confidence from that McCall defeat. Yeah. And even though Lewis was frustrated by not being able to get an immediate rematch with Oliver McCall, it was actually the best thing for him. Because if you look at how he was against Butler, Morrison, Fortune was way, way, way below Lewis's level, so we don't really talk about that much. But if you look at his level of confidence here, he wasn't really ready for McCall right away. And if he had gone in there with McCall right away and beat him on points or whatever, right, he still would have had to go in against the elite guys, and he wasn't ready for the elite guys. He would have got beat by the elite guys, in my opinion, at that time, because his confidence wasn't sufficiently recovered. And that's why I always said about AJ going and taking the Ruiz rematch. Yeah, he could outbox Ruiz, who's a plodder. He's got fast hands, but he's got slow feet and a very poor defense. So he could beat a guy like Ruiz just by moving around using his height and reach. Yeah, but then he's going to have to defend his belts. Dangerous guys like Usyk out there and all these other mandatory challengers that are going to be coming at him. And in that situation right there, he's not going to have time to be able to learn, because you have to learn in fights. It's one thing doing things in the gym. No, you have to actually be in professional fights, work on certain things, have learning fights. AJ didn't have enough learning fights. He's learning on the job now. And in my view, he's not learning with the right team by way of his training setup. Certainly not Robert McCracken. That's not the right team. Lewis did the right thing by firing Pepe Correa. See, a lot of you guys now who are caping for Rob McCracken, and you've been caping for him all along, because I've been saying that AJ should fire Rob McCracken long before he lost to Ruiz. That's a fact. It's on my channel. Can't tell me I'm lying. I've been saying he needs to fire him long before he lost to Ruiz, because I could see the problems that he's experiencing now coming a mile away, because he wasn't improving in the areas that he needed to improve in. Yeah. And you guys, if you were around in Lewis's day and Pepe Correa had been made this, darling of the Lewis fans, the way that McCracken has been made a darling of the AJ fans, you would have been saying, no, he shouldn't fire Pepe Correa. That's his mentor and he's like a father figure and blah, blah, blah. You'll see. All that emotionalism is no good. I'm telling you, people, it's no good. Lewis got rid of that guy, dropped him like a bad habit, hired Manny Stewart, and he went from strength to strength. Yeah. When he lost to Hasim Ratman, Lewis knew that it wasn't Manny Stewart's fault. Lewis was the complete package by that point. By the time when he lost to Ratman, he lost to Ratman because he was complacent, because he was out there messing about in Hollywood, making movies with Vladimir Klitschko and George Clooney, not taking the Ratman fight seriously, turning up to South Africa at a career heaviest weight, right? 253 pounds, career heaviest. Didn't acclimatize to the high altitude in South Africa, in Johannesburg in South Africa, when Hasim Ratman had been there for weeks, acclimatizing. So after a couple rounds, a career heaviest, when he wasn't focused on the job, Lewis was breathing real heavy in the Hasim Ratman fight. Was nowhere near as sharp as normal, and that's why he was getting clipped. He was a very, very sloppy Lennox Lewis in that fight, and he ended up getting knocked out. That's not Manny Stewart's fault. Right? That's Lennox Lewis' fault. Messing around in Hollywood and, not turning up to South Africa early enough and all this kind of stuff. That's not a lack of knowledge in terms of what Stewart is teaching him as far as technique and tactics. No, that's Lewis. That's his mistake, and he knew it. That's why he didn't fire Manny Stewart after the Hasim Ratman fight. Yeah? And in the second fight, he was sublime. So, of course, there are times when a guy loses and he doesn't need to sack his trainer. Of course there are. But again, I've been calling for AJ to sack Rob McCracken long before AJ ever lost. That's a fact. Needs to sack this guy. This guy's got to go. If AJ wants to make the most out of his potential, McCracken's got to go. And he's got to do it sooner rather than later while he's still got time. I think AJ's, 31 now? As I say, Lewis was 30 years of age when he lost to McCall. AJ has time to do what Lewis did and take these rehabilitation fights. Let's see here. So Lewis lost to McCall, had 1, 2, 3, 4 rehabilitation fights before he fought for the title again. I called them rehabilitation fights. Lewis, I guess, didn't intend for them necessarily to be rehabilitation fights other than the first 2, right? Butler and Fortune, maybe Morrison as well, because he was a bit past it by then. Mercer was a proper fight. They knew that was going to be a proper fight. Butler, Fortune, and Morrison. I mean, Butler was a fringe contender who was pretty much a journeyman by then. Fortune, was he even a fringe contender? He got stopped by Buster Mathis Jr. And Morrison, he was a contender at one point. He held the WBO belt at one point, and he was actually supposed to fight Lewis years prior, but got knocked out by Michael Bent. This was actually Morrison's last bout before he got diagnosed with HIV and had his license revoked. So anyway, that was the real fight out of the 4. Yeah, was the Ray Mercer fight going in. So it was really 3 gradually increasing in difficulty fights. Yeah, that's how the matchmakers, I'm sure, and the management thought it would be. And then finally a proper fight in the 4th. And then after the proper fight against Mercer, they then went in and fought Oliver McCall in the rematch for the vacant WBC. This is how you rehabilitate a fighter. And then after he got that WBC, there was Henry Akinwande, there was Gallotta, there was all these guys before he eventually fought Holyfield. You see the way that these fights are preparing him for the elite guys? You see? AJ is not in this position. AJ is in a position where everything is about money. Hearn wants him to go straight back in an immediate rematch. AJ feels like he's obligated to go into an immediate rematch. If I was in AJ's team, I'd be telling him, you know what? Slow down. You don't need to take this fight. Yeah, with Andy Ruiz, I was saying, yeah, he can beat Ruiz. With Usyk, it's a different kettle of fish. AJ has the physical dimensions to be able to beat Usyk. And he potentially, if he's taught the right way and has the right technique and tactics, could beat Usyk. But I don't think that he'll be able to change significantly enough and recover mentally quickly enough to be able to beat Usyk in the rematch. I don't personally see it. If he's able to do it, I'll be very impressed. But this is not like the Ruiz rematch. People, don't delude yourselves into thinking it is. Against Ruiz, he got caught with one shot in a fight he was winning and never recovered. Against Usyk, he got beaten from the first round all the way through to the 12th. Usyk was the dominant fighter all the way through in every department, inside, outside, everywhere. So it's a very different thing. Usyk is much more skilled than Ruiz. He's not going to be training on pizzas and desperados or whatever for the rematch, is he? He's a pure athlete. So a very different situation. And AJ's made enough money now where if he wanted to, he could take some rehabilitation fights. It's not like he needs desperately to start making multi-millions again. Would it strain his relationship with Eddie Hearn? Maybe. But again, this is why you don't sign career-long promotional deals with people, because you don't have the flexibility to do what's best for you in most cases. So never mind career-long, even several years, 5-6 year contracts is too much. It's not a wise decision. Anyway, let me know what you guys think in the comments below. Come and join me on Patreon and access my weekly no-holds-barred, censorship-free podcast where we lift the lid on a wide range of controversial topics. It's not mainstream friendly, it's not politically correct, but that's the whole point. We dare to stand as a beacon of reason against an army of insanity. Just head on over to my Patreon page and select the tier called Ratman Hot Topics. You'll gain access to a minimum of 2 hours of exclusive content every single week, including podcasts, videos, interviews, live stream Q&A sessions, as well as my popular Confessions of a Nightclub Bouncer series. Not to mention a vast back catalogue of hundreds of hours of previous episodes. You can listen via the Patreon app with the option to download in high quality MP3. We've also got a Discord server where you can come and chat and hang out with myself and other members. There's no contract, no commitment, and you can cancel at any time. So come and join our community of free and critical thinkers by signing up with me here on Patreon today.